Welcome to the weekly question video. If you'd like to leave us a question, details on how to do that are down below, as well as a link to our Patreon if you want to support what we're doing. This week's question is, if you could start over, what would you do differently and why? I feel like we've been talking a lot about this concept in the last podcast and really even in the next couple podcasts that are going to be coming out. This concept of what we would have done differently if we would have had the knowledge and experience that we have now in the beginning. Because the fact of the matter is that we did make a lot of mistakes in the very first stages of implementing domestic discipline, and it would have been nice to avoid those. And so what we have come to realize is that when we first started domestic discipline, we kind of approached it in kind of a backwards sort of way. And what I mean by that is we talked on one of the podcasts, I can't remember if it's the one that's already posted or if it's the one that's going to be coming out this week or next week, because like I said, we've been really talking a lot about this concept. But when Coda and I first started domestic discipline, we started with implementing rules. And while that sounds like the right thing to do, it really is the last step of a process that we skipped all of the other steps of. And so what we would have done differently is we would have started with a foundation of expectations. And what I mean by that is that every relationship should have some sort of foundational expectations. Many couples will use the 4 Ds of domestic discipline kind of as a framework for that foundation, where they, have expectations around respect and honesty and obedience and safety. And that's kind of the core values or the foundational values of their relationship that everything else kind of gets built around. And then beyond that, you can decide as a couple, or the head of household can decide, what are the most important character qualities or just pillars of expectations in the relationship that go beyond that foundation. Things like integrity or responsibility, things that don't necessarily fit into those foundational expectations, because those foundational expectations really are the foundation of the framework, and then these pillars kind of hold everything up. And from that foundation, from these pillars, that is where you build your rules. So if we could go back, we would have started with the concept of having foundational expectations. That was never a conversation that we had, and it really did set us up for a lot more early mistakes and blunders and miscommunications and frustrations, because we didn't have this concept, this understood expectation that things like respect and obedience, honesty and safety were just givens within the relationship. I went in as the taken in hand, kind of having this concept that those would be expectations. But Coda, because we had never had that conversation, didn't really know where those lines were, because we were coming from a very well-established relationship that we had functioned as a couple for over 10 years at that point. And so he wasn't really sure how this was going to shift how we interacted with each other. And so when I would be disrespectful, or when I wouldn't necessarily ask his advice, opinion, or permission on certain things, he didn't really know where his authority extended. And I wish we would have had that conversation, because when we started domestic discipline, I really wanted him to come in and extend his authority in those areas of our relationship, because that's what we were missing. But because we never had that conversation, it caused a lot of growing pains in our early domestic discipline journey. Beyond that, I wish that we would have talked about the pillars of character qualities or expectations that we would have had if Coda just was like, I want you to be a person of integrity. And then we could set up rules around that. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a person of integrity in the eyes of my head of household? Because that's the other part of this, is it's all very individualized. And so you have to find out what those things mean to you as a couple. And so, does that mean that you show up to things that you commit yourself to, that you don't cancel at the last minute without a really good reason? Does that mean that you show up on time? Does that mean that you just do certain things? And that's where you build rules, right? So the rules could be things like you need to be on time. And if you're late, then there's consequences. And so that is how we suggest people build rules, is think about the why behind the rule, not just, well, this is a good thing to do, so you should just do that. So that's what we would have done differently in how we approach building the structure of our relationship and implementing rules. The other thing that we really would have done differently is how we approached punishment. Because if you've listened to some of our earlier podcasts, or if we've recapped it recently, I'm not sure, but we have talked about in the past where when we first started our domestic discipline journey, that each rule that we had a certain number of like spanks or swats associated with breaking that rule. And that very easily and very quickly led to some girl math, as they like to say, where I was calculating if breaking that rule was really worth it to me, because maybe the punishment that I knew exactly what to expect, maybe that wasn't so bad. Maybe dealing with the punishment was worth doing what I wanted to do in that moment. And that is definitely not how you want to approach domestic discipline. I was very, very early in my journey of true submission to my husband. So that was also a key factor, is that now, even if we were under that same system, I don't think I would have that mindset, because I just have a different mindset around my role and my responsibility to submit to his authority. So that definitely played a factor. But if we could go back, we, number one, would have made the spankings a lot harder and a lot longer from the beginning. We would have negotiated and established that Coda holds full authority in the punishment process, and that he gets to decide how hard the spanking's going to be, how long it's going to be, how long it'll last. That I have no say-so in how punishments go. And that's okay with me. That is what we have established, and that is what we have found is good for our relationship. Of course, I know that if something is going really wrong, if I need to communicate something to Coda, I can do that. But we don't have that like full stop on punishments anymore, because we found that if I have the ability to stop my punishment, if I have the ability to negotiate during my punishment or even before, that it gives me too much power in that process. And so we would have really established the power exchange aspect of how we approach punishment. We would have established Coda's authority of how punishments go, and we would have established that I don't get any type of like negotiating power of what punishment looks like. And if I break a rule, then it is completely at Coda's discretion to decide how the punishment is going to play out. And he's a very fair head of household. He is a very reasonable head of household. So he punishes me very, very fairly. He does not over punish. He does not blow things out of proportion. He always looks at the intention behind my misbehavior. So, even if the behavior or the mistake itself might not look like that big of a deal on the outside, he's always looking at like, why did that happen? What was the intention behind it? And he's really trying to build me up to be the best person, the best taken in hand, the best wife that I can be. And so he's always looking at like my intentionality, my thought process, my motivations, and he's shaping and guiding those things. So if we would have been able to establish that process in the beginning, I think we would have seen so much more growth in our relationship. We would have seen a much more seamless transition into domestic discipline than what we had. But I'm thankful that we did have the learning process that we did, because now we can bring it to you guys through this podcast, so we can say, look, this is what we did because we thought that that's how things were going to work best, and it really didn't. And we can bring all of that experience to you, and it really has drawn us together as a couple more to have kind of gone through this together and kind of grown into our roles together. And so that's been a beautiful experience, and I really don't regret the experience that we've had. But if we could go back and tell ourselves at the very, very beginning, hey, these are the things that are going to be major mistakes in how you approach this, and you'll save yourself a lot of time and a lot of grief if you just do it this way instead, we definitely would. All right, well, thank you so much for joining me. Again, if you want to support us on Patreon, the link to do that is down below. And if you want to leave a comment, leave a question, we always appreciate that. And we will talk to you guys next time.